I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with more Loushy and Daniel Sivan, the directors of Camp Confidential, America's Secret Nazis, which is streaming on Netflix. It has been shortlisted for the Oscar for documentary short subject. And either one of you can take this one. For people who aren't familiar with this film, give us the basic premise of it.
Go ahead.
Well, it's 1942, and we have Jewish refugees escaping Europe. Nazis are in power, and they take refuge in the US, and they join the army, and they hope and dream to go and fight Nazis in the US and end up in a secret camp next to DC where they actually host Nazis. And we won't spoil it, but it's nuts.
Yeah, one of the things that's so interesting to me about this film is how this was such a secret for so long. I mean, this was so classified and really only became declassified, I believe, in the early 2000s. How did this information come to you?
So this information was classified for decades. The camp was bulldozed in 1946. All the documents were burned. The camp was bulldozed. Nobody knew about it. And then somewhere in the beginning of 2012, I believe, the National Park Service that worked there suddenly discovered that the place that they're working in was a secret camp back in World War II. A neighbor actually told them that story, and they started, asking questions about it and discovered this crazy story. And of course, that they asked the U.S. government to declassify it and started looking for all those, Jewish interviewers that worked there, and they found them and interviewed them, and that's how kind of, we reached that subject. And we didn't believe it. We said, okay, we know, so much about World War II, but we never knew that Nazis entered the US, and, and the US government actually took them to flip them sides in order, at the end of the day, to fight against the next World War II, against the Soviet Union, and bringing German scientists into the US, in order to use them for their own, for their own good. So
yeah, it's kind of opportunism at its finest. But at the same time, I think one of the most kind of heartbreaking parts about the film is you have these Jewish soldiers who are aware of the horrors of what's going on in Europe, and yet really are forced to kind of, I wouldn't say befriend, but kind of like, just walk side by side with these German officers, these Nazi officers. What was your gut reaction when you started hearing some of those audio recordings?
I mean, we are not naive, we come from a troubled country, and, doing historical docs, you always discover that countries are not necessarily very moral, history-wise, but we did have this perception of there is some red lines, there should be some kind of good and evil going on. And you discover that there's just nothing like that, that just the US was recruiting these Nazis during the war, while the Nazis were exterminating Jewish people in Europe. And they just had no kind of moral conviction. It was just, what is the interest? What do we need? And that was kind of heartbreaking.
And I think also, for the Jewish refugees, the Jewish soldiers, it was a process. They didn't immediately understood. At first, they thought that this is the way, that they're helping the US to win the war. And of course, that they had all the interest in the world to win the war. They thought that they're helping, the US to end the war. And it was a process that suddenly they understood that they're not only, taking information from those Nazis. No, they're pampering them, and all those scenes that you can see in the film where, they're taking those Nazis to a Jewish department store to buy lingerie for their wives in Germany. They're taking them out for coffee. They're taking them out to DC. And that is, it was a process for them, and it was a real burden. And when they understood what was going on, they were crushed, but they were also refugees that just escaped Europe and just escaped Germany. They weren't in a position to say, no, we can't do it. No, it's not moral. They were playing along with the US government.
There's two, I believe, two of those soldiers, you do face-to-face interviews with them in the film. Did you get a sense in talking to them that not just the experience, but actually holding this secret for as long as they did, did you get a feeling that it took an emotional toll on them?
For sure. I mean, when you hear about people coming back from Vietnam and some of them are, broken from inside, they didn't speak to it about it to a lot of people, but they did speak about it to their wives, to their friends. These Jewish refugees, the veterans, didn't speak about it to anybody. It was the biggest kept secret in the US for 50 years. And for them, it took a very heavy toll. And until this day, we talk to them now after the film is out, and they're still, very, very emotional about it, saying, if we were in the position today, we would have said no.
I think one of the most interesting aspects of the film is the way that it blends these kind of interviews with a great deal of animation. So I'm curious as to how the animation journey started. How did you decide on that approach?
So it started because we understood that there's a lot of sound recordings of interviews of people that already passed away, unfortunately. And there was only 15 stills photos. That's it. No archives almost, because everything was burnt. And we started thinking, okay, how are we going to tell the story? And in our filmmaking, we always we don't like experts talking about it, but we like that the viewers are in the story and that they could feel the story. And then Daniel told me, okay, let's do, animation. And I'm such an archive buffer that I told him, what, animation? I mean, I don't even like cartoons. So, but then we started, processing this idea, and met with amazing animators, and we started this process. And I think it was the best decision for the film, because it gave us the opportunity to really tell this, even ironic and this crazy story. And we could say to them, here we want a pool, and they drew a pool. We're not used to it. We're documentary filmmaker. And it gave us the opportunity to really, on the one hand, to do whatever we want with animation. And it was very important for us, the facial expressions, that we can feel the characters on the one hand. And on the other hand, we did have very specific testimonies of how the camp looked like and the photos. And we really tried to be very accurate, and it succeeded. And of course, we mixed it with real archives, because we said, okay, it's the Holocaust, right? So we don't want to do recreations. For us, it's kind of a red line with the Holocaust. And so we did the animation on the one hand, but on the other hand, we did put, the horrors of the Holocaust in real archives, that people will know, no, it's not only animation, it really happened. And then when the film, when we end the animation and you really see the real archives of Werner von Braun, which was Hitler's chief scientist, and you see those images and you understand that it's absolutely real.
Yeah, there's an aspect. One of the things that I responded to, particularly in the animation, is it almost has this kind of like 1940s animation style, because when you talk about animation, there's such a breadth of styles. Did was the style of the animation really important to you?
Very much so. I mean, we dreamt of doing something that is 2D animation because it is aligned with the same atmosphere of the 40s. But looking at it, it just didn't bring the emotional value to it. And on the other hand, we didn't want like 3D glossy animation that would feel very like detached. We didn't want it to feel sci-fi in any way. And we were really looking for this vintage look of how can we bring the 40s to life with 3D animation. And I think they really nailed it. It was a very long process of us giving them hell. A team of 10 people would just like animate like crazy. And then we would like say, yeah, it's good, but like, no. Yeah.
You mentioned, the Werner von Braun, who is, such a key figure in the film. And, it is equally chilling to go from the animation to that speech of his, around the moon launch, and knowing what the history was. In choosing to kind of, focus on him, was there a message you guys were trying to send in kind of ending with that kind of like, it's almost kind of a hopeless feeling?
Yeah, of course, there's always a message, and our film were very, social justice, political, thought-provoking. So I think, of course, that each one takes his own message, and that's the beauty of documentary films. But of course, that Werner von Braun, he was a Nazi. He was a part of the Nazi regime. He was, the chief scientist of Hitler. Everybody knew him. Everybody knew his past. He knew about Auschwitz. And then he came to the US, and the US embraced him. They looked at him as a hero. They cheered for him, all for, for the moon. And they didn't care. They whitewashed his past. He never paid for his crimes. It was just for, for the good of reaching the moon before the Soviet Union will. And you have to think about it, us as a society, where our red lines are, are crossing, where do we put a stop of someone's past? Are we embracing him only for, to achieve? And if we achieve good things, but we use, such an unmoral person so I think that is also very relevant for today, for our present, for our future.
When you look at, how governments deal with dark regimes today, be it, different undemocratic regimes in South America, or with Russia, or with Saudi Arabia, and it's always this national interest in which we have to collaborate with them because it's a bigger interest. But in the end of the day, we look the other way again and again and again. And Werner von Braun is a person that he really gained like the biggest prizes and awards for American aviation, and is still considered an American hero. And you can see in the archives how even the Boy Scouts are cheering for him. And nobody ever, took his star off NASA and said, hey, this person should be, judged for his past crimes.
Presidents embraced him. You can see in the archives, Kennedy, and I mean, everyone embraced him without thinking, wait, this is a very problematic past. This is, very problematic issue to put Nazis that at the end of the day reached very, very high positions in the US. And I think that this is problematic for us as human society to let it happen. And we're happy to bring the story to life.
there's that line that one of the soldiers has towards the end is like, it's basically a twist on, do the ends justify the means? And he says kind of clearly no. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about these constant, these necessary reexaminations of things that have come out of World War II, what is it about that era as we move farther and farther away from it? Do you think we become in danger of losing it? Do you think that's where some of the power in some of these stories lie?
I think every part of our history is worth being re-examined. I mean, as time goes by, things that were our present become our history, and they're always important to re-examine with new tools. And also, like in Israel, there is this saying like, be silent because we are shooting, which means we are in wartime now. You can't criticize the government. And really, like back then, you could see how so few people could criticize the American government because it was the Cold War and you don't want to be portrayed as a communist. But as time goes by, we can look back and really re-examine it. And obviously, re-examining World War II is critical, but so does every other event in history. Just as more as, we can just dig in and expose and reveal things that were censored and hidden, I think that's the responsibility of every filmmaker.
So I have to ask, just for purely, outside looking in perspective, what is the feeling of being on this documentary shortlist for the Oscars?
It feels, amazing, great, but of course that we have still a long way to go to the finals, and it feels good to that people are recognizing our job. But at the end of the day, of course, it's the process, it's the filmmaking, it's it's the fact that we actually do what we love, and we bring such stories to light, stories that were silent for so many decades, stories of people that nobody heard about. And all those Arno and Peter and the people that were interviewing, they just waited for their voice to be heard. They carried this burden for so many years, and to give them the opportunity to raise their voice and actually, let the people see the film, react to it, and think about not only the past as we're, seeing the film, but of course also think as our society, as humans in the present and in our future, what we can do better to have a better society.
I think really the biggest prize for us is discussing the film with you.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that, we are shortlisted and getting some more attention and stage, and people can actually talk about von Braun, that's fantastic for us. Like, that's winning the Oscar for us.
Well, both of you, congratulations, and enjoy it. Enjoy the journey, and thank you for doing such great work. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Oscars, and stay tuned with interviews with more contenders throughout the season. More Loushy, Daniel, Sivan, a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.